So I'm just going to get a mixture down for my drawing. I put down this initial tone just to kind of knock down the bright white. First thing I'm going to do is just establish, well, where do I want kind of the top of my cranium to go, and then where my chin's going to be at. This way, this is going to give me a little bit of room for, I guess, like the shoulders. As we mentioned, the center line is going to be kind of where the eyes are going to be at. This will be roughly where kind of the base of the lower lip is going to be at. I'm just trying to get kind of the general. And I might have to change this a little bit. A lot of times, I'll admit, I'll take off my glasses initially just so that I can kind of just see the larger structure. I can always add in the glasses on top. I think that this nose needs to go up a little bit higher. That should be the base of the nose for that line. I'm always making comparisons. So I'm like looking at, my hair's a little long, trying to look at where I'm seeing a little bit of the hair below my ear in relation to, the mustache. It's kind of almost in alignment. So yes, we're doing a more complex subject as opposed to, still life, but some of those same sort of things that we were doing early on in the semester, we need to keep in mind as we're doing our portraits. So a lot of comparison and assessment of how things are relating to one another, I feel like. So now I feel like I have the structure kind of close to where I want it. I mean, it's always good to take a step back and look at the painting. You're like, well, there's not much there. I'm just more or less trying to get a feel for, hey, does that seem like a close approximation before I move forward and start putting in, some more kind of darker values to help separate the light side from the shadow side. And I think there's going to be some things I'm going to need to correct. But I think it's good enough for me to move forward. I'll just put in a value for mustache. And I'm using a really simple palette for this. I am just using a primary set plus white. Because I'm not going to be using a whole lot of really exotic, really saturated colors. So sometimes it's good to just simplify it so that way you can focus on kind of the more like the drawing and the value structure. I will admit, I do feel like having facial hair kind of helps because it kind of obscures some parts of the drawing, and it's like at least it's another landmark. I'm keeping these darker values fairly thin so that way I can go back in and kind of correct it. Now let's maybe try to get, I'll go back in and I think I'm going to get the eyes a little bit more defined. get the upper lip kind of defined. And it's kind of a dark brown that leans more red. Now I think I'm going to start establishing some of the form and cast shadows. So I mean, I kind of got the eyes a little bit more in place, but I haven't really quite defined the shadow shape underneath the nose and off to the side. And when it comes to like kind of, I guess, Caucasian flesh, at least in this sort of scenario, it's kind of like a nondescript brown. I think it's a little bit warmer. I kind of painted through the nostril at the moment, because then we'll go back in and kind of add that in. And if you have questions, just ask. And I know I'll be able to go back in and kind of darken the facial hair to kind of help separate it a little bit more, because I know the value structure looks a little too compressed in that area. The nice thing is when you're using such a simple palette, if you make mistakes, it's really easy to correct it. Put that value a little too dark. We get a different brush. Maybe darken facial hair a little bit. And I'll admit, it looks a little dark on the screen. It looks darker than it actually is. Come back in here and put in the nostril because I kind of painted through that. Noses they're really hard because there's a lot of subtle plane changes and then also subtle shifts in edges. Some are soft, some are hard. One of the things that we really have to be conscious of is not kind of painting what we think these different facial features should look like, but paint them what we see. Maybe start to get in a little bit more the darker value for these eyes. And I would also say that if anyone wants to do this from life, the difficult thing is maintaining, well, not shifting around too much. That makes it quite a bit more difficult. So what you almost have to do is try to get your drawing down, kind of have that locked into place, and then start to build up the color. Get some of these darker values in over here. And the nice thing is like my initial tone isn't half bad as kind of like the light side value. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But it's close enough that I can kind of almost focus on getting the shadow side down. And I'm able to see the painting start to kind of come together. few more things down. I'm noticing is this area up here is a lot cooler. And there's some interesting things, like when it comes to men, a lot of times in like the lower third, because of hair follicles, usually this region starts to shift more green, and you'll see a bit of that temperature shift kind of in the midsection and around the eyes. It's going to kind of shift a little bit warmer, a little bit kind of redder, and then I think the forehead will, I don't remember if it tends to be a little bit cooler, but definitely around kind of where you would grow facial hair, that typically shifts a lot more kind of green-blue. Brighten that up just a little bit more. I'm just going to do a little bit more because I think you guys kind of see this starting to come together. I know it's not perfect by any means, but I would say that the hardest part of this entire process is trying to get the structure down and more or less mapping out the light side from the shadow side. And I know that many of us will probably choose reference images where we're not kind of directly facing the viewer, but we can still use this sort of system, modify it and analyze our image and hopefully extrapolate that information to help us out. I'm going to maybe clean up at least this area over here. So a lot darker. Let's see. Color seems actually a lot greener. When it comes to hair, do not paint every single individual strand. Same thing with eyelashes. What you want to do is more or less get the general kind of, I guess, values down and color. Because this is the focus, not the hair. So really, the hair should be simplified to more or less frame the facial features. I feel like this could go a little bit darker over here. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. I know it's not perfect.